purely because I'm really interested in some of the stuff that I see in Hines. And I'm very, very aware, Chief Digital Strategy Officer, you're not the ESG person. So maybe this is a holistic perspective, but from a lot of the readings I've done, you're doing an awful lot of interesting things around ESG. And in particular, funnily enough, there's a couple of things. So number one, you've been quoted before in interviews that you've done saying, Mr. Hines was green before the term green was even fashionable, which I quite like to understand. I know you've done a few things around sort of timber construction previously. And then the other thing I'd really like to sort of just touch on for a little bit is so many firms focus on the E bit, and the S and the G is often the sort of the afterthought. And I remember particularly there was a conference I was moderating previously, and there was a 30-minute keynote about a particular German retailer. And they spent about, and I timed it, it was about 26.5 minutes on the E, and then 3.5 minutes on the S and the G at the end, which was about one slide each. But you've got things like your Mayo Clinic, for example, of looking into wellness, which I know you've talked a lot about. So I don't mean to be answering this question for you. So let's rattle that back in terms of, how does Hines deal with this ESG movement that we're currently seeing?
Well, this is a beast.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll say it. And so, so you have the ESG landscape, and we, about over a year ago, promoted Peter Upping into our global head of ESG as a very specific, we are having somebody that's running this program. Where are we going with this, and what are we doing? And he actually came from the business side. He was a fund manager for a while and very passionate about this. We also, about a year ago, took somebody from our construction sheet, asked him to lead. He's our VP of carbon strategy, which I think was probably one of the first roles of its kind in the real estate industry, because we said, we need specific focus on this area. So with that, we have a lot of different groups and subgroups and people back to on the ground that we have focusing on all this. What I'd say is you have to have your strategic vision and where you're going with this, but then you also just have to get started. Again, going back to the local side, right? You have to get started. And so we're getting started, and it's hard. I mean, it is hard because of the different places that, a local market is at, related to, getting information, related to tracking information and all of that. So we're literally just kind of starting to move through the getting started phase of what do we want. We are focusing on the E because it's an easier place to start, even though all this is hard.
Yeah.
What I would say is, if you have ESG, G is nebulous for everybody. Fundamentally, G for us is data and data governance. Because we truly believe that if you can't measure it and you can't quantify it and you can't be transparent about it and you can't be able to report on it so that it holds up scrutiny, then you're not able to do what you need to do. So to us, the data really falls under this governance structure, but it kind of goes across all. Of course, there's more to governance. Of course, there's more kind of from a reporting standpoint and and frameworks and all that kind of stuff. But the fundamental core of that is the data, so that you can go do that and in a transparent way. The S is interesting because there's a lot going on with the S, but it's really hard to measure. And so you can track what you're doing, which I think is great, and you want to continue doing all this, which is phenomenal. But then how do you measure it and translate it into something that makes sense to people? And so that's kind of where we are with that, is what it mean, because yes, we're doing things with Mayo Clinic or well labs, or everything we're doing on the ground with helping things in Ukraine, or versus what we're doing in certain other cities. But what do you do with that? So there's an S component because we're doing the S, but then there's a what do you do with it? And then when you come to the E, there's, in our minds, E kind of breaks into two different buckets, which is carbon really and operational carbon. And the embodied carbon is an interesting area because, the industry is really, not there yet. So we're pushing forth on whatever we can do to move the industry related to embodied carbon. We've put out an embodied carbon playbook, like really trying to to work with, again, all groups in the industry. This is, it's not a competitor type situation. Like, this is, how does the industry move related to embodied carbon? Because it's important for us all to do that. And then operational carbon is really where, back to where I said we're getting started, is because you've just got to slog through this of how do you start getting this information, so then you can actually start making decisions to change that, right? And say, if I know this, what do I change to get to this, right? So that's really where we are so again, we have a strategy and a plan. And what I just laid out for you is kind of more on the tactical execution standpoint, but that's where we are right now.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. It's a nice way of bringing it back around actually to finish, because I think ESG strategies are so complex and convoluted, and there are now specific people that are employed to put these into place. That was a perfect overview of